The first watch arrived at the shop 3 days before Alina Prout died, and Thomas Ashford almost didn't notice anything strange about it at all. It was an ordinary pocket watch, gold-plated, a little worn at the edges, the kind of piece that passed through his hands a dozen times a month in a town like Millbrook Falls, where old money aged quietly in attics and jewelry boxes until someone finally decided to sell it or fix it or simply understand what it was worth. The woman who brought it in, a niece cleaning out her aunt's house, said only that it had stopped working sometime that week, and she wanted it running again before the funeral, though her aunt, so far as anyone knew, wasn't dying. Thomas took the watch into his back room, the small, cluttered workshop behind Ashford timepieces that smelled of oil and brass and 80 years of careful work, and he opened the case the way he had opened 10,000 cases before, and something in him went very still. The mainspring hadn't simply wound down. It had snapped. Not worn through, not fatigued by age, but broken clean, sheared in a way that a spring under normal tension almost never breaks, and the hands of the watch had stopped at exactly 4:47, frozen there like a held breath. He would have thought nothing of it, chalked it up to a manufacturing flaw or rough handling, except that when he turned the watch over, he found something scratched faintly into the underside of the case back, so fine it was almost invisible unless the light caught it just right. A single word, waiting. He told himself a bored teenager had done it, some prank from decades ago that had simply never been noticed, and he repaired the spring and returned the watch to Alina Prout's niece 2 days later, running smooth and keeping perfect time. Alina Prout, a 78-year-old widow who lived alone at the edge of town and still walked to church every Sunday, rain or shine, died in her sleep that same night, quietly, peacefully, her heart simply stopping sometime around 4 in the morning. When the coroner's report came back, almost as an afterthought, it noted the approximate time of death as somewhere between 4 and 5 that morning. Thomas told himself it was a coincidence. He was a practical man, 63 years old, the third generation of Ashfords to run the shop on Elm Street, a man who believed in the measurable, dependable mechanics of gears and springs, and the reliable, comforting truth that time moved forward in exact, countable increments and nothing more. He did not believe in omens. He did not believe in anything that couldn't be taken apart, examined, and put back together with tweezers and a loop. But 6 weeks later, the second watch came in, and this time he could not tell himself it was nothing. It belonged to a man named Roger Callahan, a retired mill foreman who brought it in himself, complaining that it had simply quit on him overnight, no reason, no warning. Thomas opened the case that evening after Roger had gone, alone in the workshop with the desk lamp pooling yellow light across his worktable, and he found the mainspring broken clean through in exactly the same way. The hands stopped at 11:03 and scratched into the case back, in that same fine, deliberate hand, the same single word. Waiting. Roger Callahan collapsed in his garden 4 days later. A stroke, sudden and merciless, and the paramedics who found him estimated he had been lying there since sometime around 11 that morning, alone, unheard, until his neighbor happened to glance over the fence. Thomas did not sleep that night. He sat at his kitchen table with both watches laid out in front of him, though he had, of course, already returned the first one, and only had his careful notes and his memory to compare against the second, and he turned the strange, impossible coincidence over and over in his mind until the sky outside his window began to lighten with dawn. He was a rational man. He had spent his entire life believing that machines did not carry omens, that broken springs were simply broken springs, metal fatigue and manufacturing tolerances, and nothing more mysterious than physics. But 2 watches, 2 broken springs snapped in a way he had never once seen in 40 years of repair work, 2 scratched warnings, 2 deaths that lined up with frozen hands almost to the minute. He could not make himself believe it was chance. Not twice. He almost closed the shop the following week out of some superstitious, half-formed fear he couldn't fully name. But Millbrook Falls was a small town, and Ashford Timepieces was the only watch repair shop for 40 miles, and people needed their grandfather clocks wound and their heirloom watches fixed regardless of what strange feeling had settled over its owner. So he kept the shop open, and he kept working, and some quiet, dreading part of him began, almost against his will, to watch every watch that crossed his counter for a broken spring and a scratched word he prayed he would never see again. He saw it 4 more times over the following 8 months. A young mother named Diane Foster brought in her late father's wristwatch, wanting it as a keepsake for her son's confirmation, and Thomas found the spring broken and the word scratched into the caseback. And 3 weeks later, Diane's own husband was killed in a highway accident on his way home from a business trip, the time of the crash matching the frozen hands to within minutes. A retired schoolteacher named Harold Voss brought in an anniversary watch he'd given his wife decades earlier, wanting the crystal replaced. And Thomas found the same broken spring, the same word, and 11 days later Harold's wife suffered a fatal fall down the basement stairs of their home. Each time, Thomas told no one. Each time, he repaired the watch as though nothing were wrong, sent it back into the world ticking smoothly and giving no outward sign of what he'd found inside it. Because what exactly could he have said? He had no proof of anything except his own increasingly frayed nerves and a pattern that sounded, spoken aloud, like the ravings of a man losing his grip on reality. Who would believe that broken mainsprings could predict death? He barely believed it himself, and he was the one holding the evidence in his own trembling hands. But he began, quietly, obsessively, to keep records. A private ledger, hidden in the bottom drawer of his workbench, where he wrote down every watch that arrived with a snapped spring and a scratched word, the date, the owner's name, the time frozen on the hands, and later, when he could bear to find out, the date and manner of the death that followed. By the 8th incident, 10 months into this strange, silent nightmare, the pattern had become undeniable even to a man as stubbornly rational as Thomas Ashford. Every single watch had belonged, however distantly, to a family connected to the person who would die. Not always the watch owner themselves, sometimes a spouse. Sometimes, as with a leaner Prout, the watch's owner was the one who died, but more often it was someone close to them, someone who shared their home or their blood, as though the watch itself were somehow tethered not to a single person but to a household, a family, a small orbit of lives that intersected with whatever dark mechanism was choosing them. He began to lose weight. He began to flinch every time the bell above his shop door rang, dreading the sight of a customer reaching into a bag or a pocket to produce another piece that would need to be opened. His wife, Miriam, a patient woman who had shared 31 years of his life and understood the particular silences of a man carrying something he wasn't ready to say, finally sat him down on a rainy October evening and asked him, plainly, what was eating him alive. He told her everything: the broken springs, the scratched word, the ledger in the bottom drawer with 8 names in it, 8 dates, 8 deaths that had arrived like clockwork, if the word could still be used without irony, after each cursed watch passed through his hands. Miriam did not laugh at him, and she did not immediately dismiss it, which was, in its way, more frightening than if she had. She sat with the ledger open in her lap for a long time, tracing the names with one finger, and when she finally spoke, her voice was quiet and careful. "You need to stop repairing them," she said. "Whatever this is, Thomas, you cannot keep sending these watches back out into the world as though nothing is wrong with them." "And say what?" Thomas said, his voice cracking with the exhaustion of 10 months of silent terror.